Hi, in this video I want to talk about formatting blocks of type. So when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about kind of the formatting that you may be familiar with in InDesign, Quark Express, Microsoft Word. So instead of dealing with type on paths and so forth, which is helpful, but what I want to deal with is formatting blocks of type. So I'm going to just get out the type tool and just draw in a block, and I'm going to paste from I have some text from the lorem ipsum text generator that I talked about in the other type video. And you'll notice here that, well, first of all, let me select the type just with the black arrow. If I go under the type menu, I'm going to show hidden characters. Hidden characters are handy to look at when you're formatting any kind of type, just because they will show you any additional characters that you might not be aware of. So notice that paragraph returns show up as kind of a backwards P. If I double click and notice that these paragraphs are starting with a space in front of them. If I press Tab instead, notice that I have a little right arrow. So these things are effective for being able to see how type is formatted. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the problem with having extra characters. So let's say, for example, that you're using spaces or tabs to indicate indents, and you've put in extra return to put space between lines of type. The problem is that when you're editing this, or you present it to somebody, a client or your editor, and they say, well, you know what, let's get rid of all that. Let's not have such a big space here for the indents, or let's get rid of the space between paragraphs. Well, you're kind of stuck. First of all, you either have this tab or you don't. Now, we'll talk about tab stops where you can adjust that, but just suffice it to say right now, it's somewhat limiting. You can either have an extra carriage return or you can't. If you don't, sometimes you can tell that there's a paragraph starting, sometimes you can't. So what I want to talk about instead is the proper way of doing formatting. That's to get rid of all of these extra things. So I'm getting rid of the extra tabs, the extra returns. And by the way, this came up in class. Could you change those extra paragraph returns? Unfortunately, if you go under Edit, Find and Replace, Illustrator, for whatever reason, has all kinds of funny characters you can look for. Forced line break is not a paragraph return. Unfortunately, you can't find change. At least I can't find a way to do it. Find change a paragraph return. If somebody figures out how to do this so that you can just do a find change on a paragraph return, let me know, and there's probably some extra credit in it for you. But at least in version CS5 here, it doesn't appear to be the case. I checked online, and you used to be able to do this. You used to be able to put in, I think it was \n, and find on it, but it no longer does that. Let's try. If I put in forced line break, I think that's like a shift return instead. Do a find for that, and notice it doesn't find it there. So unfortunately, you can't search for like 2 paragraph returns and just reduce it to 1. So again, another good reason why you might not add these is that your life might become more miserable if you have to remove them. So I'm going to just manually remove these right now. So now I have a real mess. I can't tell where my paragraph returns are, except for the fact that I have invisibles on so I can see them. But remember, your viewing audience isn't going to see these guys. So how do we make something that works? Well, that's where paragraph formatting comes in. If I highlight these paragraphs along the top here, you'll notice I think this is called the control bar. They used to call it the options bar. Anyway, the bar along the top, there's a paragraph button. If I pop that out, there's a couple of key things that I can choose. By the way, these are just shortcuts to, if I go to Window, down to Type, there's a whole lot of these. So character is Command T, paragraph is Command Option T, and then tabs are Command Shift T. So those are kind of nice to remember. But anyway, I like the little shortcut instead. It just pops out and it's there for a minute. So first way that you can indicate a paragraph is typical indents. So if I press the first line indent a little bit, notice I'm hovering over this, it says first line indent, I get a little break. Now what's nice about this is if your editor wants the indent bigger or smaller, you can just go in and make a change to this and it adjusts those indents. Now notice it only does it for the paragraphs that I have selected. The other thing that we could do is, let's say you don't like indents. Instead you want to work with space between lines. That's kind of where the whole using an extra carriage return or extra paragraph return comes from. Well, there's space before and space after. You can choose. You can choose to use both. If you use both, they'll compound a little bit. So I'll do a little bit of space before and a little bit of space after, and what they're doing is kind of sitting on top of each other. A lot of people ask, well, why do you have both? I'll show you an example of that in a minute here when we use subheads and body copy. But right now I'm going to just use space after on these paragraph returns. Notice that the first line, if you use space before, the first line doesn't push down from the top of the box. Okay, so we put in those values, and now really quickly we're able to create some paragraph formatting. But the cool thing about it is that spacing isn't being used by having extra characters. It's just a formatting issue. So if I decide to change that again, I can change it through formatting. You'll see why this is handy in a sec. I'm going to make a paragraph style. But before we do that, let's deal with some other things. I'm going to go ahead and format this first paragraph exactly the way that I'd want it. So I think you triple click. Looks like it's a triple click to select the paragraph. With triple click, I'm going to come in and pick a font. By the way, here's another goofy thing. Open up from the little font choice here, and you don't get a preview. Click on the little character button and click on font, and you get a preview. Go figure. I'm going to just pick something straightforward, Palatino. So we switch it over to Palatino. I'm also going to use leading. Leading is the space between lines. Whenever you see a parenthesis, that means it's the auto lead amount. So right now it's auto leading 14 point for 14.4 point for 12 point type. Basically, Illustrator's just adding a little bit extra for that. I always will look for, when you're dealing with type, I'm always going to look to see that you're setting a fixed leading amount, that you're using something rather than the auto leading. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, as a designer, you should be choosing what the leading value is, not the program. The next thing is that leading looks different with different typefaces. So for instance, look, this is Myriad, it's 12 point. If I highlight this, let's change this to Adobe Garamond, sorry. Here we go. And Garamond has a different kind of look to it. Even though these are the same point sizes and they're using the same amount of leading, I think you could easily say in the comparison that this looks a little looser in its construction. That's just because of the proportion of the small characters to the caps, or the X height is what they're calling this. The X height to descenders and ascenders, that's different in each font. So because of that, you're going to have a relative looseness or tightness that occurs with different fonts, even with the same point size, same leading value. So I want you to get in the habit of picking fixed leading so that you're making a design choice and so that the type looks appropriate for what you're going for. So for instance, if I go in with myriad here, I would say in general I would loosen this probably a little bit. So I'd come in under character and increase the leading on this a little bit more, so that that copy now has a little looser quality. It has a little more openness to it. In terms of typographic color, these two lines, if you just blur your vision a little bit, these two blocks of paragraphs now look very similar, even though this is using a different leading value than this. So anyway, that's my whole little soapbox on leading. Coming back to this guy, we've set some leading, we've set some space after on it, and we've made a font choice. Now, if I want to apply this to all of the paragraphs in here, I could remember all of these things, and maybe I'd get it right, maybe I wouldn't. But what I'd rather do is create a style. So I'm going to go under Window, down to Type, and choose Paragraph Styles. Notice that with all the paragraphs I'm making in here, it just has this normal style with a plus. That just means that right now it always starts with Myriad Pro, 12 points, etc. And I've gone through and I've changed these to a certain amount. I've given the space after for all of them, and then in some cases I've changed the fonts. All you have to do is format a paragraph kind of the way you want it to be. So just highlight a little bit of text in that paragraph. So get the paragraph set up just the way that you like it visually. And then come into paragraph styles. I'm going to make a new style. It makes this paragraph style 1. If I double click on it, it opens that up. The first thing I'm going to do is change the name to something like copy. If I say copy, then we're dealing with body copy. It's easy for me to identify. And notice it has all the information in here. Palatino, regular, 17-point leading, no space before, but there's a 7-point space after, so on and so forth. If I press OK, now that shows up as copy. Now, Illustrator, I think, has a bug in it. I can't describe this any other way. InDesign works differently. Notice that before, when this was highlighted, it said copy without a plus. Now, if I clicked anywhere else in the paragraph, it says copy with a plus. This means that it supposedly is using the copy style plus there's some local formatting. Well, we know that's not true. It's using exactly what we're seeing inside of that paragraph style. We haven't changed anything, but we're getting this copy plus. So what I would recommend doing, if you want the next stuff to work, is select all of the paragraphs, and I'm just pressing Command A, and when you do that, it selects all the paragraphs that are even not visible. And I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and then click on Copy again. And when I do that, it applies no paragraph style. It gets rid of these overrides. Illustrator calls them overrides, local format. We want to override the local formats. We're getting rid of all of those, so now if I highlight any of this text, notice that we don't see a plus appearing. Big deal. Well, here's why it's nice. Now I can go in, even with this block not even selected. Imagine that I have 8 artboards and they're all using this body copy. And I sit down with somebody and they're talking, they're like, well, you know, that's okay copy, but I'd really, instead of having the space between the paragraphs, I'd like to use indents. So you say, great, no problem. You come back, double click on your style, click on indents and spacing. Notice that's where it says 7 points, space after. I'm going to just put in 0. And instead, I'm going to give it a first line indent. Let's give it, since it's 12-point type, let's give it 12-point first line indent. That's not a hard and fast rule, by the way. It's just kind of a starting place. Have a peek and see what happens. Okay. Now I can see paragraph indents. I can still tell where new paragraphs are, and in fact, even if I hide the show hidden characters, it's very easy to tell where new paragraphs are. Either way, with space before, space after, or indenting, it works. Okay, so that's one. I was going to talk about using space before and space after in conjunction. So let's put in a subhead. So I'm just going to press return. A subhead would be, kind of a single small line that precedes a block of copy. So let's say this is for brochure. This is a brochure. So let's have a line that just says hotel accommodations. I always misspell accommodations. By the way, spelling, where can we find spelling in here? I think it's under edit. Yep, check spelling. Opens up kind of this goofy old spelling checker, but you can come through here and it's going to find all kinds of problems because it's not looking for Latin text and it's encountering lots of Latin text. But that's where you can do it, under edit, check spelling. Alright, so anyway, hotel accommodations. We're going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to come in here and I want to change this so that it looks more like a subhead. So instead of using Palatino, let's use some, maybe Optima is a good one. We'll go to Optima. Let's choose extra black. Oh, that kind of looks nice. And let's make it, typically your subheads are a little bit bigger in size, but this is looking pretty good. 14 might look a little better. Okay, and then let's do some paragraph formatting on it. So I'm going to just choose no left indent, because a subhead we can tell is the beginning of a paragraph, but we're going to use a little bit of space before here. There we go. And by making these changes, now we can separate this text. Highlight this. Notice the copy now says, hey, you have local formatting here. We do, because we've made those changes. I'm going to say, no, I want this to be a new style. Double click on it. By double clicking, it applies that style to it. Notice it says paragraph style 2. And we're going to call this subheads. And again, it shows what changes we've made. Notice that funky little plus showing up again. So again, once you've formatted, it appears that in Illustrator you have to option click to retag it so that it'll actually not have any other local formatting changes applied. Now the cool thing is I can go in and make some changes. I'm going to click away so nothing's selected. That prevents, by the way, let's say you're like, oh, I want to edit copy. If you come over and click on copy, it accidentally applies that style. So I don't want that to happen. So instead, I'm going to click away so no type is selected. Double click on copy. Now let's use, instead of the left indent, or I'm sorry, the first line indent, let's go ahead and use a space before, and you'll see how these work together. So, I'm sorry, space after. I'm going to use a little bit of space after with my body copy, and notice how they work together. The space after pushes the each line or each paragraph a little bit further away, and when it gets to the hotel accommodations that's using a little bit space before, it's compounded. The space before of the subhead is being added to the space after of the body copy, so we get a little bit more distance between subhead and body copy. That's pretty standard in formatting. The key thing when you're doing subheads is you want the subhead to be closer to the copy that it represents than the copy behind it or above it. Okay, so we've set up some paragraph styles, and again, the great thing about this is we can go in and change the look of a paragraph at any point. So I might go in and maybe I want to change some of the character formats. Maybe 17 points is too extreme. I switch it down. By the way, you can choose something other than what you've got here. Just put in a value, 15 point. Let's try that out. Okay, to that. Maybe my subhead, I actually do want a little bit of space after this too, so it just stands off a little bit. It's kind of a big dialog box for these changes, but you can monitor them at least with a preview. And again, we could change font and all of those things here. So by doing that, and by applying that, clearing the overrides, option clicking on the style, I can now make those changes at any point and fix it.